Thank you very much to everybody on the ICT panel. One of the best success stories in Afghanistan. Truly, we're very heartened by your briefings today. I want to make another pitch. So our planning now, we're going to have our quick half-hour Washington policy update with some updates from the London conference and from Capitol Hill. Following that, we'll be breaking quickly for lunch. We'll have a shortened lunch break today. We'd like you to grab lunch and then come back into the room. And then we will start hopefully back right on schedule for our afternoon panel. And then we'll start our business matchmaking. The business matchmaking sign-up sheets are filling up quickly, so be sure you check today for those as well. And thank you guys very much. Appreciate it. Okay, if we could ask our Michael Phelan and Jonathan Carpenter to come on up. We're going to do this panel basically seated, and so we don't have to use the podium to make it a little easier on everybody. Our goal is to provide an update on the key issues that are going on right now in the economic relationship and maybe look ahead at the next 2 years. The administration will have 2 more years, and then following that, there'll be a new administration and a new president in Washington. I want to thank first Jonathan Carpenter, to my right, from the U.S. Department of State. Jonathan serves as the Deputy Special Representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan. Prior to assuming his current position, Jonathan served for 3 years as a Senior Economic Advisor and the Special Representative for AFPAC, Afghanistan, Pakistan, at State Department. He's also a career Foreign Service officer. He's previously served on professional staff of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, where he worked with Senator Lugar on a number of issues related to the Middle East peace process, the Libya conflict, and a host of others. Michael Phelan, to my left, is a senior professional staff member currently of the minority, and for Afghans, that's our Republicans, so right now are in the minority. That will change in January because they just won the Senate in the election that occurred in November, so he will soon be the majority senior professional staff member responsible for Afghanistan starting in January. Michael has served as an Afghanistan expert on the staff there for some time. He's been to Afghanistan multiple times. He knows about the state and USAID relationship with Afghanistan extremely well and tracks a lot of the ongoing activities there, and we're very honored to have both these guys here with us. Just for ground rules, because I know we have a lot of Afghan media here today, Michael's appearing today, but not to represent the views of the United States Senate, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, any particular senator or member of the committee. He's here in his own personal capacity, and we're appreciative of that. If there is some question or an issue with regard to you'd like to use a quote or something that he said today, you're going to need to ask him that directly, either following the panel discussion or give him a call at his office, and he'll be happy to talk to you, I'm sure. So, context. Let's just offer a little scene setter context, if we can, on Afghanistan. So the economy is, I wouldn't call it struggling, but it's now shifting and transitioning into a private sector-led economy as opposed to an aid-dependent economy. U.S. public perceptions, for a lot of our Afghan guests, you may not know this, but if you've been watching TV here, you'll understand, most of the American public has kind of a singular view on Afghanistan, and most of it's negative. They think of everything as being high insecurity, a lot of attacks, a lot of Taliban problems, corruption issues, and so forth. But in truth, the Afghanistan private sector development that you're a member of and participating in is dramatically improving, especially in key sectors like mining, extractive industries, ICT, as we just heard from that panel, and agriculture, among others, and construction and infrastructure as well. Just to remember, I think it's always important, the context. From 1978 to 2002, Afghanistan was completely destroyed by 25 years of war. Millions of Afghans had died. Millions had fled the country as refugees. The per capita GDP was $180, which put them at the lowest ranking of all countries in the world. Their human development capacity was low. Their education levels were low, except for those that left the country and went outside to study. Women were not allowed to be schooled or to go to work. From 2002 to 2014, with the support of the United States, our allies, and other organizations, Afghanistan undertook perhaps the largest, most dramatic reconstruction of any nation in history. By 2014, Afghanistan's per capita GNP has now reached $687. More than 8 million children are going to school nationally, with 40% of that 8 million being young girls. The decimated education system now has 17 universities. It has over 200,000 students, both in elementary and secondary schools, and they're now fully operational. The Afghan healthcare system is dramatically improved. Life expectancy has now risen to 42 years in 2000, from 42 in 2000 to now 62 years of age, a dramatic increase. In addition, women are now seen as integral to the new economy and to the society, and the successes of a lot of young Afghan female entrepreneurs, several of whom are here at our conference, we're very proud of, and to see them here. The reduction of foreign aid, though, now, and the transition that we're going through over the next few years is going to mean that you in the private sector are going to have to do and carry a lot more of Afghanistan's growth and responsibility for that growth. You have 17 banks now in Afghanistan. Electricity access is improving, but it's still very difficult and not unified. There's new and reconstructed roads and bridges. There's greater mobility around the country, but there's still a lot of deep problems in the social welfare sector. But multilateral and bilateral partners, represented by USAID and others, have committed to maintain support to Afghanistan for those social welfare components through 2017. We just heard from the ICT sector, and I want to just make sure you capture today a couple of things that they didn't say but were in a previous ICT report that the AACC put out. In March 2014, the World Bank reported that communication services grew in Afghanistan 55% in 1 year. They continue to grow at the fastest rate consistently of all sectors over the last 10 years. Afghanistan now has 50 internet service providers, 2 million internet users. There are hundreds of ICT companies that are now being driven by young, educated Afghans who want to make a difference in their country. Their mobile cell phone service now covers 90% of the population. They have 27 million paid subscribers, 22 million cell phones currently in operation within the country. And what I'm very happy about, 8 out of 10 Afghan women now have access to mobile phones for use. In 2001, it was 0. So that's a dramatic increase, and I think really a tribute to the ICT development sector and to a lot of the people that helped to make that happen, Bob, and your team, I know especially. So from the perspective of what AACC would like to have going forward for Afghanistan from a policy standpoint, we have 6 basic recommendations that we've been talking about for the last year. First is we'd like to see more Afghan products, whether they be raw minerals or other products, added to the U.S. GSP treatment list. This is something that USTR is already looking at and may be able to do. Secondly, we'd like to launch a bilateral trade agreement negotiation with Afghanistan, separate from Afghanistan's WTO accession, which the administration is already working on very hard. We know that. Thirdly, we'd like to have completed a bilateral investment agreement to allow U.S. companies to participate in Afghanistan. Fourthly, we'd like to have a U.S.-Afghan tax commission formed so that there can be a bilateral tax treaty. Every major country that the United States has grown its economic relationship with needs a tax treaty, and it's usually one of the first things that's undertaken. That way there's clarity, because investors, especially large corporations, will not invest unless they know the tax treatment on the profits that they'd make. Fifthly, we'd like to keep working with President Ghani to help fight corruption within the commercial sector especially, and I know many of you have raised that issue since you've been here. And then lastly, AACC would like us to help fix the visa issues. As you saw in the London conference, they made a major announcement from the Secretary on that. We are so happy to hear that. A lot of you know the trouble and the difficulty you've had to travel here for this conference, or if you've come in previous years, you know how hard that is. This should make it a lot easier for you to come, to meet U.S. companies, and to have the kind of business discussions that you want to undertake. So let's launch now with our 2 respondents today. First, we'll start with Jonathan. He's going to provide us a quick update on the London conference from an economic policy or private sector standpoint, and just some opening remarks. You can use that one or this one.
Thank you very much, Jeff, and thank you to everybody at AACC for having me back. I think this is my 3rd or 4th time here over a few years. And I note that it's grown, I think, in both scope and thoroughness. And I just congratulations, Congressman Ritter, for all the work that you've done here with your board. I bring greetings on behalf of Dan Feldman, the special representative. I'm sorry that he's unable to attend today, but I'm glad to be here on his behalf. And I wanted to spend a few minutes, I think, just do 3 things. First was to do sort of a quick but sober assessment of where we think the economy is. I think that's largely already been done. I'll add a little bit to that. A snapshot of what I think is particularly relevant here at the end of 2014, the London conference, and maybe just a few thoughts on what's new and the implications for us moving forward and how we view this. So first, I won't add much to what Jeff has already offered on the economy, and I would be loath to tell Afghans in particular anything about your own economy. It's not a wise position to take. But I'll tell you that as we think about this, the talking point, the approach we're taking to this is to reflect on the gains over the past decade as being very real and very impactful, but not yet sustainable. And as we think about how we approach the economic situation in Afghanistan, as we think about our assistance, as we think about the policy choices that we're making, our focus now is to work with this new government in Afghanistan and make these very real, very substantial, very important gains in the economy, in the social sector, in education, in health, and everywhere else that USAID in particular has been fundamentally important to make those sustainable. And that initiative, sustainability, it must be Afghan-owned and Afghan-led, right? It must be driven by the private sector. It must be driven by government reform. It cannot be done from the outside. We have a role in that, but it cannot be done by us. I'd say one other thing, and that is, in support of sustainability, we have dramatically changed our assistance program in Afghanistan over the past 3 or 4 years. I won't go into it. I think Kath Campbell's been here, others from USAID, but a much stronger emphasis on the foundations for long-term growth, on investments in foundational economic infrastructure like the electricity network, foundational investments in agriculture, in transport, in trade, efforts to improve access to markets through reforms in the customs administration. And I would say one area where we've had real trouble, and I'll come back to in the opportunity section, is in the financial sector. So where are we here in the end of 2014? So I'm just back from London, which from our perspective was a very strong conference in support of Afghanistan. I would say most importantly, President Ghani and Chief Executive Officer Abdullah, over the course of a week in meetings throughout Europe, demonstrated in both their statements, but also in their personal regard for each other, in their interactions with each other, and how they approach the international community. They demonstrated that this government of national unity is working. We had real concerns going into the conference that the lack of a cabinet might distract from that message. It did not, I can say to you. And I think across the board, international donors and Afghanistan's international partners took great confidence from what they saw in the presentations from President Ghani and Chief Executive Officer Abdullah. This government of national unity has built confidence, and it has done so in a rather remarkable way. So you'll read a lot, you'll hear a lot, particularly in the United States, of a focus on appointments and cabinet members and the like. But if you think about what this government has accomplished in just the less than 2 months that it's been in office, and on the international stage, that is engagements in Cardiff, Beijing, Oslo, Brussels, London, trips to China, to Saudi Arabia, to Pakistan, a strong statement of reform delivered to the London conference. It's quite remarkable what's happened and how much this government's been able to accomplish, given its very real capacity constraints. And I don't know how much. I'm sorry I haven't been here for the whole conference, but if you have not pulled down and looked at the government's document that it produced in London, I strongly encourage you to do so. You don't need to read all 30 or odd pages of it. You can look at one paragraph, paragraph 8, if you have to look at just one, that demonstrates how this government is approaching these issues, the kind of sober, realistic, practical approach that this government is taking, and which I think donors in particular in London responded very well to. So let me talk about, for maybe one more minute, sort of what's new here and where we think this is going. First, we see in this new government both increased capacity, a new approach, and measurable action already taken. On the capacity front, let's just be clear. This is a president who knows economic development, who's focused on it, and who prioritizes it. So in conversations that we've had with him from the beginning, obviously issues like security and the security transition at this moment have been a focus, but in every single conversation, the economy, the role of the private sector, the role of U.S. assistance and other donors is prioritized. And I would say, in doing so, the president has undertaken and has delivered a message of Afghan ownership and Afghan responsibility, the likes of which we have not previously seen. And I think this is something that we can all take great confidence in. And it's manifesting itself already. So, for instance, the progress that has been made on a regional energy grid, particularly with regards to the CASA 1000 project that we've talked about for years, was a direct result of President Ghani's instructions to conclude a pricing agreement with Pakistan. And I heard the president say quite clearly to a group of regional partners in London, I heard the president say, we put aside short-term, Afghanistan, put aside short-term rent-seeking in support of long-term energy interdependence and economic sustainability. I mean, just think about that statement for a moment and what that means for you as business folks, as you as investors, for us as policymakers dealing with Afghanistan. It's quite remarkable. I've already made reference to the London document. Again, I think the approach is one of kind of sober, credible Afghan ownership. And in addition to the CASA action, I would note action on Kabul Bank, action quite quietly but quite significantly on anti-money laundering, counterterrorism finance through the Financial Action Task Force, the invitation from the president to our Treasury Department to return technical advisors to Kabul to support the financial sector. These are very real, very positive changes. And again, this has all happened in the first few months. And I would be remiss here if I didn't talk about the importance of Afghanistan's engagement with the IMF moving forward. Again, fundamentally a relationship that was broken just a few short months ago, but is now very robustly on track. Okay, I will spend, sorry, that was one, that's gone on. Mike, yeah, let me just do real fast before I hand it to Mike. I would like to close with one thought, and that is, you are going to hear a lot about both the military transition and 2017 and the drawdown and all this. Let me state very clearly, the United States, through the generous appropriations supported from Congress and supported, in a smart way by people like Mike Phelan, has made available to the United States, still in our pipeline, significant assistance. We are planning for long-term sustained engagement in Afghanistan. We have resources at our disposal that we will deploy over the next few years. And on the basis of a more sustainable, successful approach to build on and make durable these gains that Jeff already articulated, we're confident that we'll be able to go to Congress and seek further appropriations to support this economic engagement. All right, thanks. I'll stop there. Cheers.
Okay, Michael, so give us Congress's, or at least your perspective on where Congress is feeling that Afghanistan's at now, and then what kind of concerns do you have looking forward maybe the next 2 years, and anything you'd like to add in on current policy innovations?
Thank you, Jeff. And Jonathan, it's a pleasure to appear here before you. Thank you to AACC for inviting me. This is my first visit to the conference, but I've followed it over the years. Let me first say and echo what Jonathan said about the London conference. There weren't a lot of practical outcomes from the London conference. There had been some expectation built up prior to it that it would be something more, but I think there was sufficient outcome on an optimistic outcome to say it was successful. It remains to be seen to what extent the donor community recognizes that optimism and reflects it in their continued support across the spectrum. Afghanistan is still a long way from independence from its partners. And long before the ISAF and the U.S. got involved in Afghanistan directly, They had been working their way through it as well in the midst of war. So we stand here today with Afghanistan in a far, far better situation than it was before, but with the prospect of going in either direction. And I think from my perch in the staff on the Hill and my observation over the last 12 years there, that it can go in several directions. I think it's important to acknowledge the statements that the new government has made, the efforts, obvious and quieter agreements to identify areas in which they can work together, and they must work together in order to leverage the opportunity that they have right now. But they have to continue to show that publicly. They have to continue to build confidence, legitimacy, privately in conversations with their partners and with the Afghan officials and the Afghan people. So the campaign, which was a remarkable campaign across Afghanistan by the candidates, in fact, that in some respects must continue. Informing the population, informing the constituents and those interested in investing, both directly at home, locally in communities, and investing more broadly nationally. That conversation should be encouraged to continue. The last government in Afghanistan didn't see it as a priority. I'm pleased to see that this government has begun its engagement with different sectors of Afghanistan, either directly or through video conference, as I understand it. It has engaged directly with neighbors to encourage investment and positive relationships. It has gotten in return, I think, very positive responses. All of this plays into how the U.S. Congress perceives the opportunity and the opportunity cost or the risk involved in continuing our very close engagement. There are also other things that will influence the congressional perspective. Right now, in our own committee, yesterday, there was a discussion about the authorization of use of military force. This is a complicated, complex, and legal discussion, but it's also a very important strategic discussion for us as we seek to address our own national interests in the Middle East, in Iraq, and in Syria, and the threat of Daesh. We believe that that can influence what goes on in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and it's even been threatened in India. So none of those governments can be complacent about that security threat because they see the virulence of it and the capacity it has to really hobble governments and their efforts towards development. It is akin to the Ebola crisis in bringing everything to a screeching halt, reversing all gains. I think it's important to remember that the U.S. is engaged in other areas. It's engaged in Iraq and Syria, and there's an important element of why Afghanistan remains in the talking points. It's because there is a precedent that some see that what happened there several years after the U.S. departure could happen in Afghanistan. There are plenty of arguments on either side why it's less likely to or more likely or as likely, but it's important to consider. There is the commitment of resources to the millions of refugees associated with the Iraq-Syria crisis, the ISIS war. There is the situation of the negotiations with the international community and Iran. There is the continuing belligerence of Russia in its sphere. And these are all having a decided influence on U.S. attention and drawing, as we've seen in the supplementals that have just come through, the supplemental appropriations, a significant amount of resources, somewhere in the neighborhood of $5 billion for Ebola, another several billion for the ISIS fight. So it is drawing significant resources. The drop in oil is significant because it has such an impact on our interests and others. But it also goes to policy decisions on energy around the world, including policy decisions on energy by governments, not just the private sector, as we've seen in the South Stream from Russia. So I raise these to caution you that the attention that has been spent over the last decade on Afghanistan is not a perpetual attention span, and it is normal for us to reorient ourselves to other crises, especially the headline crises. Not to wish crises upon you to draw us back, as it were.
Of course not.
But that's what some in the more stable parts of the world say. What do we have to do? Get a terrorist or a nuclear weapon to get some attention? So I think this conversation that took place in London, the positive developments and advances made by the new government since its formation, and the prospect that it presents leaves things wide open, and Congress will look for the next steps, the ensuing steps, the formation of a cabinet, the next steps in addressing the corruption, be it the Kabul bank issue or other elements, the ability of the national security forces to continue to gain capacity and capabilities and continue to warrant the confidence of the international community in sustaining that and maintaining the kind of influence you'll need to maintain a stable and secure environment for investment. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions that.
All right. One point I want to point out. Yesterday, the Secretary hosted the Kazakh Foreign Minister, and as a result of that meeting, Kazakhstan committed to a sizable increase in a scholarship program to educate 1,000 Afghan students at Kazakh universities. He agreed to push for the Kazakh-Turkmenistan Railroad and the Caspian Seaport, and to continue working closely on Afghanistan in this regional hub concept that AACC has been pushing. Is there anything there, Jonathan, you wanted to let these guys know about from a private sector standpoint?
I think all I would add to that is that, in fact, the idea of broadening the opportunities for trade has been a priority for this new government in its first few months, and it's something that we've been trying to encourage ourselves. You'll hear us refer to the New Silk Road, the Asian roundabout, but regional ownership of these challenges is important to us. The Kazakhs have been leaders in the region on this, and we appreciate that. And I would be remiss if I didn't take that opportunity to say that one of the quotes that was not put up by a previous speaker from the Secretary's statement was his reference very positively to the improvements in the Afghanistan-Pakistan relationship. And any of you who do business in Afghanistan likely bring goods or goods through Pakistan and know that improvements on that relationship could have quite fundamental impacts on the Afghan economy. And one of President Ghani's first trips was to Istanbul, and they've made, as I said, important gestures, I think, here that we would like to encourage. Thank you.
I'd like to thank this excellent panel. Michael Phelan, we look forward to your being in the majority. That's great. And Jonathan, as a previous respondent here, excellent panel giving us an idea of the big picture, the relationship between the government of the United States and the Congress, administration and the Congress towards Afghanistan. And I guess the bottom line is where everybody is waiting to see how, given all these wonderful first steps and statements, how the execution phase goes beyond the proclamation stage, and that will impact tremendously on the response of the United States Congress, who are in the final analysis responding to the views of the American people about Afghanistan. So I want to thank our panel for their tremendous work. Thank you.